It is my pleasure this evening to say a few words to Gagandeep Kang, Senior Professor of Microbiology, the Wellcome Trust Research Laboratory, part of the Department of Gastrointestinal Sciences. Dr. Gagandeep, affectionately called Cherry by one and all, joined CMC Vellore as a medical student and belongs to the batch of 1981. As a medical student, Cherry was the opposite of what you might expect. Not at all boringly studious, she enjoyed many different unacademic activities, and her fun-loving side was always the lead during her student days. You would more likely to find her reading a romance novel as a textbook or having fun with friends instead of preparing for her exams. She was a talented artist, creating backdrops and painting murals for college day plays and hostel days. As the actor on the Dumb Charades team, she led the team to win many competitions. A loyal, helpful, and generous friend, she built relationships which are loving and enduring to this day. In medical college and continuing even now, Cherry combined her academic work with living life to the fullest in every way. After completing her MBBS, Cherry went on to complete her MD in microbiology here in CMC and also her PhD, after which she received her FRC path. As we all know, Dr. Gagandeep is a leading physician scientist. With specialization in microbiology and public health, with more than 30 years of experience in leading and coordinating health research in India and being an advisor on international health research. Based here at CMC Vellore, she built an internationally recognized, globally competitive, and relevant research program, which focused on enteric infectious diseases and interventions ranging from clean water and sanitation to vaccines. Dr. Gagandeep has over the last 3 decades carried out research on vaccines, enteric infectious diseases, newborn and child health, and nutrition. Her research group has supported the development of 3 indigenously manufactured rotavirus vaccines, one of which failed, while the other 2 are now WHO pre-qualified and estimated to save many Indian lives. She and her colleagues have built an integrated research system with multiple field sites, hundreds of research staff from research physicians, nurses, field workers, data management staff, complemented by state-of-the-art laboratory testing capacity for the detection and characterization of enteric pathogens and of immune responses to infection and vaccination. The research conducted has been a response to India's public health needs, particularly those of children. The research work has been published in high-impact journals and has had direct impact on health policy and programs. She has conducted multiple hospital and community-based randomized control trials at CMC, initiated and followed cohorts, and carried out multiple case control studies. She has collaborated with many institutions in India to define the burden of enteric infections and evaluated the safety and effectiveness of vaccines introduced into the National Immunization Program, most notably for rotavirus and typhoid vaccines. At CMC, she has supported the growth of a tier of researchers who are now leading their own programs. In addition to supporting people here at CMC, she also led the Department of Biotechnology's Translational Health Science and Technology Institute from 2016 to 2020. She serves on multiple advisory committees, nationally and internationally, most notably as part of the WHO SAGE Working Group on COVID-19 vaccines and as vice chair of the board of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. And we know she was the voice of our country during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Honorine Ward from Tufts University, Boston says, Cherry has been the most incredible and productive collaborator. We have been able to accomplish so much together with our colleagues at Tufts and CMC, with several joint grants funded by NIH, ICMR, and the Gates Foundation, resulting in many publications and the training of both CMC and Tufts faculty. Cherry has been instrumental in setting up the research office as vice principal in her term and forming the institutional review board. She has guided several PhD scholars and is the most highly funded and highly cited researcher in CMC and has built a formidable research team under her. She has held the prestigious research chair for 2 consecutive terms. We are grateful that she has magnanimously donated several crores towards a future expansion and the proposed new research block. She has also encouraged undergraduate research by funding and supporting the Cognitio research program for several years. Her work has been recognized internationally and has been awarded the fellowships of all the science academies in India, the Faculty of Public Health and the Royal College of Pathology in the UK, and the American Academy of Microbiology in the US. She has the honor of being the first and so far the only Indian woman elected to the Fellowship of the Royal Society in its 360 years of history. Cherry's warmth and humility is evident to all, always willing to help and also find a solution. Always proud and passionate about CMC and its vision. She has truly lived out the motto of our institution, not to be ministered unto, but to minister. She has given her best to the institution and also to our country at large. It is our privilege this evening to listen to the passing on the torch lecture by Dr. Gagandeep. Let us put our hands together and welcome her.
Okay. So thank you all for being here. I feel like Bablu already gave my talk, so I'm not really sure if I need to be saying anything more. I've listened to a lot of passing on the torch lectures, and it's always, everyone's stories in CMC are so inspiring. We all start off doing an MBBS degree, and then we branch off into our different directions. And then when we come to look back 30-odd years of having worked in this institution, we look back and we say, I did something. And every story I've heard has been truly inspirational here. Now, the talks take different formats, and for me, chronology really matters, looking back in order to be able to look forwards. So I've organized my talk as a life and career in 10 chapters. And some of them are short, some of them are really, really long. So this is how it's structured. The first one, of course, is how I got to CMC. And to do that, I have to tell you about my childhood. My father was in the railways. My mother was a teacher. When you're in the railways, you live in a lot of red brick houses. And the more senior your parents are, the bigger the houses are. My father was an engineer, so we wound up in these sprawling bungalows with acres of gardens. And my mother was, obsessed with flowers. So we set up gardens wherever we went. We spent a lot of time traveling in railway carriages with our families. So in the second picture, where I'm the one in the middle looking backwards, we're actually at the end of a train, and behind us are the train tracks that we are traveling on. I frequently wound up doing my homework while we spent weekends on trains, going from one place to the other. My sister and I had a house that always had a dog in it. This particular one is Sigrid, and she was with us in Alipur in Calcutta. Two constants in my life growing up. One was always traveling, moving from place to place, sometimes seeing new places. And the second was my parents with a cup of tea and food that we carried with us. There was something called a line box that my father had, which was packed with rations so that if we needed to cook on trains, we would. So my sister and I had this absolutely marvelous childhood as a very, very nuclear family. And my parents, who are shown here as we got to be, my father was in the railway for many, many years. We spent a lot of time at social occasions that related to handicraft fairs, to the Scouts and Guides, to hockey teams in rural Bengal, chow dancers, you name it. We've been in small town India and seen it all. So after that, I applied for medicine. I did not get into CMC the first year, which is why I'm not the batch of 1980. I'm the batch of 1981. I think we learned, because we traveled and moved so much, to deal with new situations and new challenges all the time. When I came to Vellore, my uncle had been batch of 1969, and he had come home during the holidays. And he had told me all about Vellore, this magical place where people seem to constantly be on picnics or traveling somewhere else or having people visit. And the college store would get all kinds of exotic food for some reason, and occasionally a tin of ham would make its way to whichever small part of India we were in. So I was fascinated of a medical college in the middle of nowhere where everybody seemed to know everybody. So when it came to doing the exams and having the opportunity to come for an interview to CMC, obviously I wasn't going to pass that up. So my father and I came down to Vellore from Delhi. Even though we traveled a lot, I'd never been this far south before. Never seen girls in pavadas, never seen the bulk of men in lungis, never wound up in a hostel where you couldn't get a fork or a spoon. You had to eat rice with your hands. So we stayed, well, I stayed in the hostel, and was very kindly hosted by senior students, Maggie Kurian and Christina James, and decided that if I made it into CMC, this is where I was going to stay. And that 3 days of the interview is actually quite a unique experience, one that you never forget. I've never encountered anything like it before, and I don't think many other people who are not in CMC have. But it is transformative. It does make you understand why you want to do what you want to do. So I wound up in CMC very quickly, started to make friends. And for me, what remarkable was that this was the first time I was ever in a place where everybody else in my class was also new. I'd never had that experience before. So what had happened in school was you start at the bottom, you work your way up to the top, and then you move schools. Here was the possibility of being 5.5 years in one place. So promptly in the first semester, I studied like I usually studied, discovered I did reasonably well, and said, oh, well, I can do this, and stopped studying after that until final year. So what really mattered was classes and friends and, plays, props, and picnics, and the teachers and the exams kind of came in the way of all of that. I couldn't sing, I couldn't dance, but I wanted to be able to contribute. So whatever little skills I had were made available for props and for any kind of logistic activity. And I firmly believe that everything that I did in this auditorium is responsible for everything else I've done to build teams and build for success in my career. Shown on the map are all the various places I lived, and then finally the one where I've lived the longest, which is Vellore. Now, of course, the batch of 1981 is the best batch that CMC has ever had, right? We started off with the women's hostel play. In the front row are 3 of my classmates. This I put up there was the one opportunity I was given to sing in and stand in the first row in my class. After that, they told me I was a natural seconds and I had to stand right at the back so that nobody could possibly hear me. We had lots of talented people in our class. You might recognize at least one of them. She's just handed over as the head of the Department of Pathology. And as Bablu mentioned, my skill was in Damsharads and being the actor, while Soma Rao and Shalini Rose Asirvadam were the people who guessed what I was trying to mine. We went through college and wound up at graduation, and the 4.5 years that you spend studying really builds the bonds that last a lifetime. I mean, Jay was also part of the bonds that last a lifetime. So were Shalu and Soma. Now, I do remember my teachers. I remember my teachers during classes a little bit, but I haven't ever forgotten any of the staff entertainments that we had. And those are the memories that many of my classmates carry of Alka Ganesh and others about the kinds of things that our teachers were willing to do for us to be able to bond together. So finished medicine, had to decide what to do next. And I thought I was going to do ophthalmology. Andrew Braganza, sitting in the front row here, had gone to Delhi and was looking at doing ophthalmology as well. So I traipsed up to Delhi. By this time, Andrew had been adopted by my family and was known fondly as Andrew Singh. That has persisted. But then I decided ophthalmology probably wasn't going to be for me. I thought I would do psychiatry. And then I came to Vellore, wrote the exams, made it for the interviews and didn't get into psych. A bit of a disappointment, but Jay was here. My family was finally moving to the stage where they were saying after 7 years, yeah, if you really want to get married, maybe we can live with this. So there was a supplementary selection and microbiology seats were open. I went and spoke to Dr. Jacob John and decided I was going to apply for an MD in micro, and I got in. So the mission of getting back to Vellore worked. And shortly after that, my family came and visited Jay's family in Bangalore. We got it all sorted out. And about a year later, we got married. But in MD, microbiology at the time wasn't what microbiology is today. It was very focused on being almost entirely in the lab with very few links to what the results we were generating for patients. It has changed a lot now. There is a lot more interaction. There is a lot more work that goes on in microbiology. That wasn't happening then. So then I got offered a couple of positions in Vellore. And when Dr. Mathan offered me a position in the Wellcome Trust Research Laboratory, I chose to go do that. The choice was neurovirology or GI microbiology. I chose the GI microbiology because the basic thing was if you find a virus in the CNS, it has to be causing pathology. In the GI tract, it's a bit more complicated than that because you've got so many organisms that if you do find an organism, you have to figure out whether it is causing disease or not. So a more complicated setup. And part of the reason for joining the Wellcome Trust Research Laboratory was the amount of work that they had done, not only on gut infections, but also on gut function. And I was interested in the idea that I didn't have to focus purely on the characterization of organisms. I could think about doing in the human body, and what could we do to try and change that. So that is 32 years ago. And I did a PhD. I will gloss over the PhD because it took me 6 years and was probably one of the most miserable times of my life. But during that time, I got a fellowship to go to the UK, grand sum of 600 pounds a month. And I started writing to people to say, can I come and spend some time with you in your lab? And David Brown, who had been in Wellcome in 1988, but did not know me because I had joined only in 91, actually said, well, if you've got funding, come along. So I wound up in this beautiful laboratory in Colindale, then called the Central Public Health Laboratory Service, and was amazed at how different lab science was in the UK. You could walk downstairs and pick up reagents. In Vellore, you had to plan an experiment 1 year in advance and wait 6 months to come, if they came at all. You could talk to people who were interested in the same things you were interested in. You could go to meetings. It was absolutely incredible to have a critical mass of people around you that were working in the same area. So, I did some work starting on rotavirus there. And then Jay was in Houston. So I went to Houston over Christmas to see if I could find a job working there, and interviewed with the lady shown here, Mary Estes, who is probably the best rotavirus researcher in the world. Looking back now, she was younger then than I am today. She's still active and running a full-scale lab. And we have collaborated for the 24 years since I got to know her. She was not complimentary about physicians wanting to be scientists. She said, you guys don't have the laboratory skills. And then you always want to go back to clinical medicine. And that means that the amount of time and effort you will devote to doing the science we want you to do is going to be very limited. So I said, well, I only have a year. She said, that's even worse. I don't usually take people for less than 2 years, even at a postdoc level. So I said, okay, please just try me. And she agreed. I worked really, really, really hard. She was so rigorous that during the year I spent with her, I did not publish a single paper, because every paper had to be perfect. Every paper had to have as much detail as we would ordinarily put into 5 papers. Every aspect of every problem had to be probed. It was a learning experience. She made me write, she made me review, she made me think. And we wrote a grant together, which would be activated if I came back to Vellore. First, we wrote one grant to the Wellcome Trust. It didn't get funded. We wrote a second grant to the Wellcome Trust, and that one got funded. And then I got thrown off the deep end. In order to set up that grant, I had come back to Vellore and I had gone to JP, because I'd worked with JP before on investigating outbreaks of diarrhea. And me to Suryakulam, we walked around there. Suryakulam at that time still had a high rate of HIV. It was a pretty miserable place to live, and you could figure out why enteric infections would be more of a problem there than in Kanyambadi. So we wrote a grant application which would look at us being able to find a correlate of protection for rotavirus infections. Essentially, if we had a correlate of protection, it would make it easier for us to figure out how to make a vaccine. So I came back to Vellore, started this study, and guess what? JP became principal. And fortunately for me, he had the most amazing MSc epidemiology student whom he put to work with me. So Beryl and I became a team. We would go to JP whenever we needed help, and within about 20 seconds, he would sort out what we had been mulling about for about a week. But it meant that we had to do a lot of things that microbiologists traditionally don't do. Visiting families, figuring out how to ask questions. What do people need? How do you make sure that with a small team, you can deliver on every required if you want to recruit pregnant women and then follow up their babies until they are 3 years old? You want to collect, it turned out, a dozen blood samples during that period. You need to get cord blood. It was quite challenging to set up a study like this when most of what we had done previously had been in the laboratory. And then we had Vinoha Balraj, who was working with Jayant, an alumnus of CMC, who allowed us to use this magnificent new technology of geographic information systems mapping. So we could actually locate each house instead of having hand-drawn maps that we had originally started with. So we had no clue what we were doing. We figured it out as we went along. It took us a really, really long time. But, we started with the correlates of protection. And when you start to work with communities, you actually find out that maybe what you are thinking about is not the primary problem that the community is facing. So we found out that one of the things that we was malnutrition. And we built from that malnutrition, working with Beena Koshi, to actually start looking at assessing the IQ of these children. And we found that in our urban slums, the stunting was about 60% at the age of 2. And by the time kids were about 5 years old, it had reduced to about 30%. More important than that was the fact that the median IQ in the slums was 89, and that's low normal. The median should be 100 for a population. You're starting in the slums at 89. And within that population, if we looked at kids who were persistently stunted, they had significantly lower IQs, even compared to the group that they were part of. And this, if you look at the picture there, the children look healthy. But then you have to know the age of the children and see what their height is. You can see that the boy in the pink who reaches the green line is 2 years old and 87 centimeters. And the boy in the black and is 97 centimeters because he's 4 years old and he should be 104 centimeters. So he's 7 centimeters shorter than he should be. And that is the problem with stunting. It's hidden because you need to have different kinds of data to be able to assess whether a child is stunted or not. It's very different for wasting, because if a child is really, really, really skinny, then you will be able to see that just by looking at them. The other thing we realized was that, many research projects, your funding is finite and nobody gives you money to work in the community. We had figured out during this project that what the community wanted from us was for us to run a clinic for them. We were able, because Wellcome gave me some money that was supposed to be spent for personal use, we were able to use that money to hire a doctor and start running a clinic in the area. And that clinic and the clinics we've set up subsequently have been really the key to our ability to build relationships with the community and continue to work. Communities want healthcare. We go there to do, we cannot possibly just do research. We have to be of service. And what that service is can vary depending on the needs of the communities that we are working with. So what set us apart? It was what Bablu said, the fact that we were doing really high quality field studies and then backing it up with high quality laboratory science. There weren't really a lot of places then that were doing these types of studies. There still aren't a lot of places that do things that address problems that are important to public health and back it up with high quality research in the lab that is done in the place where the problem exists. There's a lot of helicopter research in the world. Lots of people in high-income countries that study problems that are problems. And the samples are collected and then taken elsewhere to analyze. What we wanted to do was to make sure that that didn't happen. And through the strength of the team that we built and the absolutely amazing collaborators we had from many, many places around the world, we were able to send our people for training, bring them back, and establish new methods that kept us at the front of laboratory investigations in our fields. Another advantage we have is that we were an integrated, or still an integrated department. Wellcome had been established by clinicians, by Dr. Mathan and his students, all four of whom are in the front row here. And we had interactions between pathology, microbiology, biochemistry, and the clinicians all the time. Over the past 20 years, that has become significantly less. We don't talk as much, we don't go to the same meetings, and I think that is a loss, both for us, but also for them. Now, in the work that we were doing, we were trying to figure out a correlate of protection. And at that time, there were 2 new rotavirus vaccines being developed in India. And we came up with a really surprising finding from the studies that we were doing. I'm not going to walk. Essentially, what we found was predicted that one of the 2 strains would not work as a vaccine. Now, this was a program that was funded by the government of India and the NIH. They didn't want to hear what we had to say. We tried to get the data published. It took us a long time. We tried to present at meetings. We would get shut down. People would question our methods. And essentially what happened was that for about two and a half years, I was not very welcome in the rotavirus community. It was a difficult time for us, but we had multiple studies going on. And my thinking at that time was, it doesn't matter that the rest of the world doesn't want to hear us. We can't give up on what we are doing. We need to make sure that we keep pushing through and pushing our agenda of having vaccines that might work for our children. We still hadn't figured out a correlate of protection. We still have not figured out a correlate of protection, but we kept trying. We all, with the Indian Council for Medical Research, building up the rotavirus disease burden estimates. And these showed us the magnitude of the problem in India. One of the things that's really important when you want to make policy change is to have an accurate measurement of what problem you're trying to solve and what the potential is to solve that problem. So we were able to build this pyramid because we had studies in the community as well as studies in hospital. And we were able to make estimations of what the burden was for outpatient visits, for hospitalizations, and for deaths. When we continued to work on rotavirus, and by this time we were beginning to get to be quite well known in the academic rotavirus community, people came to us and said, now will you participate in the phase 3 efficacy trial of the Rotovac vaccine, which was the strain that we had said might work, not the strain that we had said would not work. Ultimately, they wound up dropping the strain we said wouldn't work. So we were right. So we worked on the Rotovac vaccine. It was a challenging study because we had to do a placebo-controlled trial, which required that we had to give the highest possible care to children. Jacob led this study and did a brilliant job. There were 3 sites in Pune, Delhi, and Vellore. And the vaccine efficacy was about 55%. The vaccine was licensed by the Indian regulatory authorities in 2014. In 2016, a lot of struggle between 2014 and 2016 to actually get the vaccine into the program. But ultimately, we did manage it. The vaccine was introduced in 2016, and by 2019, this vaccine and a second vaccine that we had also worked on with Serum Institute of India then came into the national program. Kerala was the last state to introduce in December of 2019. So these 2 vaccines are covering the entire Indian birth cohort. Over 25 million children a year receive these vaccines. These vaccines are now WHO pre-qualified, and they are being introduced in the Middle East and in Africa as well. We have been responsible for training people who work with vaccines on how to. We've trained people from China, from Brazil, from Africa, and we continue to work with groups to develop new rotavirus vaccines. Now, one of the things I mentioned was that we had 55% efficacy with the Rotovac vaccine. Usually, if you have an oral rotavirus vaccine in a developed country, the efficacy is more like 85 or 90%. So we decided to try and figure out why oral vaccines were not working so well in Indian children. The original birth cohort that we had started with had helped us predict that rotavirus vaccines would land at about 50%, even before we got the efficacy data. So there are a lot of factors that might be responsible for the poor performance. We have evaluated practically all of them, except for stomach acid and proteases and host genetics. And so far, we have been singularly unsuccessful. We really haven't figured out why vaccines don't work well. I have some new ideas now and hope opportunity to evaluate them in the future. So having done all of this, having gotten rotavirus somewhat over the line, there was, the Department of Biotechnology asked me to come to Delhi and head the Translational Health Science and Technology Institute. Dr. Bhan, who worked on the first vaccine, used to call me every 6 months or so and say, you're doing great things in CMC, but you haven't done enough if you haven't done something for India. So come to THSTI and see what you can do there. And THSTI is this beautiful institution. The government has resource like you won't believe. You know, in CMC, we struggle. Everything that we need, we have to somehow find the money, the space, the people for. The government research institute, the base is already taken care of. The research is a luxury on top of that. So I learned a lot during the 4 years I spent there. I also learned that the government loves announcing things. So when I got to THSTI, they had 8 different centers that were supposed to do many different things. By the time I left, I had them reduced to 3 theme areas. It was actually external. So really 2 main areas of work. These two were responsible then for THSTI being able to play a major role during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And it was really great to see how they were able to utilize all of these resources to serve the needs of the government. So I think the main thing is, if you want to do well in anything, whether it's clinical medicine or research or anything else, basically, you can't do it as one person alone. It has to be a team. And for a team to do well, that team has to thrive together. It's really important to make sure that we support each other and work with each other. Now, around this time, I started to get recognitions and awards for the work that I had done. And the only thing that mattered about all of that was that it gives you a platform where people don't say no when you call. I've utilized that over the last few years. But we moved from working on rotavirus to working on typhoid, again, work led by Jacob, where he did what I call the Rolls-Royce of surveillance studies. For rotavirus, I worked from 1999 to 2016 when the vaccine came into the program. Jacob managed to do the same kind of surveillance from 2016 to 2021, really shortening the time frame and setting us up so that we could go to the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunizations and get them to approve the introduction of the typhoid vaccine into the program. It has not been introduced yet, but the government has accepted the recommendation. So that means that the vaccine will come. And the important thing about the rotavirus and typhoid vaccines being in the public program is that these vaccines are and were available in the private sector. So pediatricians were prescribing these vaccines, recommending them for children in the private sector well before the vaccines could be brought into the program. The reason we do the work we do is because we want these to be available for free to all the children in the country, because the consequences of enteric disease, as we saw from the stunted children, affect the poorest children the most. So to promote equity, we have to have these vaccines in the national program. So now I'd like to move to enablers, past, present, and future. So from before I went on study leave in 99 and 2000, there are only two people left in Wellcome who had joined before that. Sheila is the one who joined about a year after I came to Wellcome, and then Thiru joined in 97, I think, 96, 97. So they've been there, and there is no way that we could have done what we did without them. But there are also other enablers at home. Nagamani and Gauri have been with us from 1989 and 1993, and the children wouldn't have grown up without them. The house wouldn't have run without them. Jay wouldn't have be fed without them. But there are also other enablers. Kumari, Edwin, Don, enablers of different kinds, making sure that we could do everything that we needed to do in the most efficient way possible. And then you have there Dr. Shobna, who was our key to getting into the area that we work in. She was running the Urban Health Center there, and she was able to give us advice over several years, help us build the relationships that have allowed us to establish ourselves and endure in Ramnaikapalayam, Kasba, and Chinnalapuram. And then, of course, there are so many wonderful people in CMC. If you come in through second gate, you know which security guys know your names, know you, and smile at you. We have one in Wellcome who's just like that, Damodran. And it's just such a pleasure to come to work in the morning and recognize that you're all headed in the same direction. Of course, I can't leave my friends out. Soma and I spent most of biochemistry classes up on College Hill, but that's because Molly wasn't our teacher. So, but I've been meeting my friends all around the world for many, many, many years, and I am privileged to know these wonderful, wonderful women. Then, of course, nothing without family. And, Jay's family, my family, our kids have been really quite lucky, whether they are in Kerala or in Punjab. They certainly got a lot of attention from everyone that they encountered in those locations and in Vellore. And of course, the dog theme through my childhood carried through my children's childhood as well. The campus is an incredible place. If you look at all the things that we and our children get to do on campus, life is good. You have a family like you will find in no other place. Extended family that you can count on, not only in our generation, but for the next generation as well. The kids grew up through school here, found their interests and passions as all of our children do. And to see them grow has been an absolutely incredible experience. Of course, we party a lot. And the best part of life is having the friends that support you. You can see that my friends actually let me sing one more time, but I didn't get to hold the microphone. And then, of course, in our, when our group was smaller, we used to entertain at home a lot. We got to the point where one year in Scudder Auditorium, we had 400 people. At that stage, you can't really call people home anymore, but it's been incredible to have field teams, lab teams, data, so many people working with us and supporting us. And the one thing that I hope for is everybody who leaves us leaves better equipped for their next job than when they came. That's a problem with research. You can't keep people for too long. So you have to make sure they can move on. We've had lots of fantastic enablers along the way. The good wishes of the Vellore CMC Foundation, but especially Shiv and Honorine, who make a home in Boston for everybody who comes through. And in London, who've been so helpful in giving me exposures that I'd never had before. Vaska made sure I could go and see the UK Biobank at a time when I was thinking about what was really required for us and for such facilities in India. And Usha, of course, in terms of connections to people in London and the kinds of research that are feasible, and just for being a role model. I think Honorine and Usha are just absolutely incredible friends and role models. Now, coming now to teaching and learning, there are two batches that are very, very, very special to me. The batch of 1987 was the first batch that I was responsible for teaching as a PG student, and the interactions that I had with them really taught me a lot, but it's a batch that's probably maybe, not quite batch of 1981, but not too bad. And then we have the batch of 1994, where I was the person in charge of the batch as a faculty member. And again, this is where I tried experiments like making a feed from microbe hunters for the first class. I didn't do that again. So yeah, interesting exercises in teaching. And finally, I got PhD students shown here, Bindu, Sashi, and Indrani. My first 3 PhD students joined at the same time, finished at very different times with very many different adventures along the way. And then I have, this is just a gallery of my PhD students, mostly past, a few still in the present. And it's been absolutely a pleasure to work with them. If you listen to them, they will tell you stories about how I yelled at them, how I didn't, approve their papers the first time they presented it, told them they needed to present better. And if they think that is going to change, that's not happening. So all of the ones who finished and have moved on, some of them have gone on to pretty incredible careers in different parts of the world. It's always such a pleasure to connect with them and see what they are doing and what they have become. If you see, there is Beryl, whom I told you about. I shared 3 PhD students with JP, Rajiv, Beryl, and Deepti Katula, all shown here on the bottom. Beryl was the first person to have a baby in our tiny little research group. Subsequently, we've had lots and lots of babies, sometimes 2 at a time. But, I think women come back stronger and really do deliver on everything that is expected of them. I don't think this would be complete without talking about Sudhir. Sudhir was, the person we brought into the lab after Sitara joined, and losing him last year was a blow to everyone in the group. I think he was one of the gentlest, kindest people that we had in the lab. We've done a lot of different things. I like things that involve a lot of group activities. So therefore, we organize a lot of meetings and conferences, some of them in India, some of them outside, some of them with international faculty. The intention is to share with others what we have learned, and it's been good. So now I'd like to talk about what next. And Venkat is taking up this challenge of taking over some of the studies that we had started. One on pregnancy risk stratification that is being done with Makunda to try and see what we can do to build systems to reduce maternal morbidity and infant morbidity. One of the things I've been really interested in and keep pushing on is the idea of human infection studies. And I'm still hopeful that they will happen in India, even if they don't happen in Vellore. The ICMR has just come out with a guidance document, and it seems to have been pretty well received, but we'll see how things go. Now I'm moving on to my next position, and this is the building that I work in. My office is on the 5th floor. And the idea of moving to the Gates Foundation is to try and have impact on a scale that is larger than I've been able to do in India alone. The areas that I'm going to be working on are Enterics, Diagnostics and Epidemiology. And the goals that we have are to end, I don't think we'll get there, but we'll certainly aim for ending diarrheal disease deaths in children and eliminating typhoid as a public health problem. We are also working on trying to make diagnostics more available for people in developing countries. If you think about it, nobody comes to CMC without a diagnostic test, and it worries me that if you go to primary care elsewhere, you have no diagnostics to use to guide treatment. So the idea is to try and change that and make it sustainable and low cost, preferably by doing manufacture in India. So to end, what have I learned in 42 years? I think I've learned that having a really strong foundation, family and friends is important. I don't like to ask for help, but I do have to remind myself not to be like that. I think in research, being curious and asking questions is very important. Believing that you can and will solve problems if you stay with it for the long term. Short-termism doesn't really work if the problem or important enough. And all of us here can make a difference. I think success really is making a difference. Nothing that we do is as valuable as building the next generation. And we need to ensure that we respect the people that we work for, the communities we work for, and those that we work with. Standing up for science is very important. And if we want to solve our own problems, we need to be doing our own research. Ida Scudder actually did that. She taught us to build people. She taught us to respect people. She did research herself to solve problems that were problems of Indians. And Anamanti here was a role model for me and for many others because she devoted her life to building nursing in CMC. CMC is a very, very special place. It's a very special community. Everything that I've done, my group has done, we did it all together. But stepping outside has taught me that CMC has so much that it really needs to share. We have the potential to contribute much, much more than we do to the country. We look after our patients, but we have incredible skills and knowledge. Many of us do go out and do things for other institutions, but I still think we can do more. Thank you very much.